Welcome to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Rose, and this podcast exists to help illuminate the path ahead of you. With expert interviews, clinical pearls, and real client success stories, my intention is to bring you hope for what's possible on this journey and to give you tools and resources to navigate the ups and downs on the road before you. If you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And I have a big request. If you have a minute, can you leave us a 5-star review? And let us know, what did you learn? What did you come away with? Did you leave with that spark of hope? This helps more people like you find the podcast. My mission is to support as many humans as possible on their path to become parent. And by you sharing and subscribing, you're part of that mission too. And I'm so grateful for you for being here. Welcome back. In this episode, I'm going to be talking more about my own personal journey in having amenorrhea, experiencing extremely irregular cycles, to conceiving my 2 healthy children. Now, my experience obviously is going to be unique, and I know that with our listeners out there, there's such a range of experiences. So take what you need from this, leave the rest. If you have questions, I'm here for you. I love hearing from our listeners. But let's rewind to 2013. I had started medical school. I had been on birth control for about 8 years at that point. And oh gosh, no, I am older than I think sometimes, you guys. I'm 38 years old. I told you this thing wasn't going to be perfect. So it would have been graduated in 2013. How is that freaking possible? Okay. It would have been 2010. So I was a second year in medical school. And I had gone through a really rough breakup with someone who I had thought was my person. I had thought was, the person I was going to marry, settle down with, have kids with, etc. It's been a long relationship. And as I came out of that relationship, I was like, everything in my life felt so up in the air. And I'd been on birth control for so long, about 8-9 years. And I just had this kind of like, it. I want to know what my body is doing. I was put on birth control initially because I had really bad cystic acne. And I had resisted going on it for a couple of years. But it was at a point at which I had been on antibiotics pretty constantly for 2 years for the acne, and it was horrible. So I was starting college. I wanted to make sure that I had, contraception also. And so I started birth control. I felt okay on birth control, to be perfectly honest. Like, I didn't have any side effect that I was aware of at the time. So there wasn't a big pull for me to come off of it sooner. But it was around 2010, I just really wanted to know what my body was doing. And I knew that someday I wanted to start a family. I had no idea who that would be with or what it would look like. Obviously, my grand initial plan of having kids by the time I was 27 was pretty much out the window at that point. And I know that so many of you can relate to your timeline just being completely blown up right now. So here I am, I'm grieving this relationship. My timeline's blown up. I'm in medical school and think I'm managing my stress well, but more on that later. And I come off the pill. I have that first withdrawal bleed and then nothing for 6 months. But needless to say, I was pretty freaked out. And I go to my OBGYN and I was like, this doesn't seem normal to not have a period for 6 months at a time. I'm kind of worried. Can we run some tests? Is there anything else we can do? And she just essentially brushed it off. She said, well, you're young. Your body will figure it out. Sometimes this happens after the pill. And I, at that point, was starting to feel really afraid. I knew enough about the reproductive system to know that if you are not ovulating, you can't get pregnant. And if you're not getting a period, you are not ovulating. And to be about 26 years old and having this experience, I pushed a little harder and I said, you know what, I'm pretty freaked out. Like, it is actually my greatest fear in life that I will not be able to have children. And she actually laughed. She like chuckled to herself. Like, I can still see her face. And like, I really respected this doctor. I'd been seeing her since I was 18. And so to have someone essentially invalidate this fear that I had, it really broke my heart. It was not the first experience that I had in medicine that was disappointing, but this was a doctor who I trusted and that I had seen for a long time. And she had, overall like a good bedside manner. She had always like checked in on me and like, how was school going and how's your boyfriend? Like, she was a good doctor in so many ways that I have her say like, hey, sure, there's nothing to worry about when we know the statistics on infertility. We know that this will impact 1 in 6 people. At that time, it was about 1 in 8, 10 years ago. But I was disheartened. I felt scared and pissed off. And so when I said, can we please just run some tests? She was like, yeah, fine. And when the results came in, I just got a note. Everything looks normal. I got a $1,400 bill from a lab because insurance is a whole nother story. I actually still have that lab bill somewhere for 5 hormones that were tested, by the way. So it was not a comprehensive test by any means, not enough to give us a good understanding of why someone might not be having regular menstrual cycles. And to be told like, it's normal, not given any follow-up was frustrating. So I call and I was like, well, what does this actually mean? Like, why would I not be having my period? And like, what's going to happen when the time comes that I do want to get pregnant? And she said, well, if you start trying and you can't get pregnant for a year, then we refer you out when we start to investigate. And that was, my first experience with, what the referral process was for people struggling with infertility. And it just seems so ass backward to me. Like, why would you not investigate a missing period? Why would you wait until someone starts trying to investigate that? I certainly didn't want to wait until I found a meaningful relationship, decided to start trying, and then was like, oh, well, I'm still not getting a period. So what now? Like, I didn't want to wait for a diagnosis of infertility to understand what was happening in my body. So I allowed that fear and that anger to really light a fire under my butt so that I could figure out what was going on. Now, unfortunately, at that time, there was less information on the internet. Well, maybe that's a good thing in some ways. We have less of these, really great books that are out there now. One of them that I am loving is It's Not Hysteria by Dr. Karen Tang. We didn't have Dr. Jolene Brighton on Instagram, and with her book about recovering from birth control, there was a lot of lack of knowledge. So it was a lot of piecing things together on my own, knowing what I knew from naturopathic medical school enough to push for some more testing, but also needing to sort of piece that information together on my own was challenging. Ultimately, there were 3 major physical shifts that I made to support the return of my cycle. And when it came to conception, I believe that there was a really big element of needing to address trauma before I could conceive. So the 3 major physical shifts that I made, the first one was stopping under eating. I had definitely grown up very influenced by diet culture. I mean, my mom, my household didn't necessarily feed into it too much, but it was just surrounded like everywhere. Like, this was the phase when models were stick thin, and we had on every billboard a Slim Fast, Special K diet, South Beach. I mean, you name it, and it was in your face. And I definitely fell prey to that. I lived into that diet culture for so long, believing that I needed to be a certain size to be worthy. And even though I ate food most of the time, I also exercised a lot, and I got complimented on how I looked because of that. So that only, fueled it further. And ultimately, I believe that I was under eating for years. And this disordered pattern of eating and thinking like, oh, I'm eating so clean was actually a major stressor for my body. Even though I had acceptable levels of body fat, even though no one would give me a diagnosis of hypothalamic amenorrhea, I intuitively have a feeling that that was an element of it. Now, I did also have high androgenic symptoms and cysts on my ovaries. So that question mark of PCOS has always lingered, but the under eating seemed to fuel stress. It seemed to fuel acne for me, having looked back, over at this point, 14 or so years of that. So when I actually started to eat more appropriately, eating more calories, eating more protein, getting more antioxidants than I ever had before, not only did my cycles return, they were not regular for a few years, but they returned, but I also had more energy. I was able to put more muscle on. I felt good. I felt less anxious. And so that was a big shift that made a positive difference in so many areas for me. The second thing that I did was swapping out all of my beauty and cleaning products that had fragrance in them. So these fragrances, these chemicals that are in our household and our beauty products, they're not regulated. And unfortunately, there are hundreds of different chemicals that act as hormone disruptors. So if we're trying to balance hormones, if we're trying to restore periods, if we're trying to regulate cycles, clear skin, improve metabolism, we've got to start being more mindful about what we are being exposed to. And no one had ever talked to me about that before. It took me, getting into my third year of medical school when we were studying environmental sciences and how ubiquitous these chemicals are. They're everywhere. It's in our fabric softener and the bathroom spray that I was using and my body lotion. And there were like 15 different things per day that I was getting exposed to. And most people in our world are. You walk down that aisle that has laundry detergent and it's just like an onslaught of fragrances. And if you've grown up with that, if it's been part of your daily life for a long time, you probably don't even notice the smell. You don't notice the fragrance anymore because those receptors have been downregulated. They're desensitized. As soon as you start to avoid them and you can kind of clear out the receptor site, you might become more sensitive to them. And that was my experience. So I, ditched the fabric softener, ditched all of my body lotions and body washes and candles and air fresheners and like anything that had on the label fragrant, perfume, natural fragrance. Since none of it is regulated and all of it can potentially disrupt hormones, I ditched as much of it as I could. And because I was a starving medical student, I wasn't buying bougie product. I was buying like what I could find at Walmart and Costco and just checking the labels for fragrance. That was all I could really afford to do at the time. And I do know that that made a huge difference for me. I noticed several things. So one was I stopped getting headaches as frequently. And I don't think most people realize that these fragrances can be a trigger for headaches. So that was a big plus. My seasonal allergies reduced significantly. So we know that like our body is, if we imagined it metaphorically, it's like a barrel. And This barrel represents like how much environmental toxic load it can handle before it starts to overflow and you have symptoms. Like my symptoms of environmental toxin overflow included seasonal allergies and headaches and cystic acne. Those were the big ones. And sometimes brain fog too. Like sometimes I couldn't figure out, like, I'm young, I'm healthy. Like, why do I feel so foggy? And when I started eliminating those fragrances, it was as if like literally like the thing just cleared. It was pretty cool and wild. And I was kind of pissed off that I hadn't known about this sooner. Like, why isn't this part of all of our education as humans to avoid these chemicals? And I've had patients who over the years, even after we've run labs, et cetera, like that was the one thing that they could commit to. Like they, for whatever reason, weren't able or willing to commit to dietary changes or exercise or supplements, but they could commit to swapping out their products that had hormone disruptors. And that has made such a significant improvement in their menstrual cycle regularity, their premenstrual symptoms, like headaches, irritability, breast tenderness, that it's without a doubt in my mind, it's one of the most important things that we can be doing physically. The third shift that I made to support the return of my cycles was prioritizing rest. Now, I was definitely a person in undergrad who pulled all-nighters to study or finish a paper or party. I was, like I said, I used to burn the candle at both ends, guys. Like I worked hard and I played hard. And I figured just because I had enough energy, I was probably getting enough rest. Well, the reality is, especially for women, but also to some extent men, is our hormones are in direct link to our quality of sleep. So our circadian rhythm is super important for our daily rhythms of our hormone output and our monthly rhythms in the case of women. And I would pull the whole thing of like maybe 4 nights a week, getting 5-6 hours of sleep and then making up for it on the weekend. And I learned like, oh, that's not really a thing. You can't really just make up for chronic sleep disruption. My anxiety, the fear that I was also having around potentially not being able to have children absolutely fed into some of the issues with sleep that I had for a couple of years where I had trouble staying asleep. I would Google and research frequently, a couple nights a week at least. And I had to put a stop to that. I had to prioritize rest once I started reading the research on circadian rhythm. And I'll actually put in the show notes today a link to a handout that I use in the Brilliant Fertility Program to help people get their best rest and to regulate their circadian rhythm so that their hormones can get as healthy as possible. I'll put that download in the show notes today because it's really been one of our group's favorite handouts. But I had to prioritize rest. So this meant getting really clear on my sleep hygiene, taking the TV out of my bedroom. I used to fall asleep with the TV on, you guys. No shame if you do that now. But I just have like such appreciation for how hard it can be to fall asleep. If you've struggled with insomnia, I have been there and I've been through about all of it with insomnia. So to come to a point now where I can say that like I fall asleep relatively easily, I stay asleep relatively easily and get 7.5 to 9 hours of sleep every night. It's like full turnaround from 14 years ago, you guys. And that was, I think, hugely important, knowing what I know now about what happens when we sleep, what repair occurs in our body, and what's occurring for our insulin and blood sugar regulation, our inflammation, and how our hormones are responding to that. So we'll talk about this in future episodes, but our hormones are essentially chemical messengers. So we don't want to shoot the messenger. We typically will say things like, my hormones are imbalanced. Like, why? What is that messenger trying to communicate to us? And I think I now I feel that my body was trying to communicate that it needed rest, it needed nourishment, and it needed to clear out all the crap that was, junking up my liver and my nervous system. So those were the 3 physical shifts that I made. And that was just one emphasis, right? With the physical. This is where a lot of the emphasis is in Western medicine, is on the physical. Like what's the physiology? What's the anatomy doing? But there's so much more when it comes to fertility, when it comes to feeling safe to conceive. So we can't ignore the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual part of it. So after I did find the person who I ended up marrying, after we decided, we pretty much knew right off the bat that we wanted to have kids. And I actually never fully shared with him my fear that I wouldn't be able to. He knew that I had irregular cycles. I think I had very briefly one time said, well, if it doesn't happen, like, I guess that means we can just travel a lot. And in passing, like, hoping that he wouldn't dig for more because I wasn't really ready to talk about that fear. But there is an element of my trauma and my upbringing that I intuitively knew needed to be at least acknowledged before I could step into this identity of mother. And this was an abandonment trauma. So I was raised by my mother, a single mother by choice. She is absolutely the most wonderful person in the entire world that I could imagine having had as a mother. She's everything to me and always will be. And she works so hard to create a life of safety for us. But there was always this wondering of, that question mark that he's just so natural of, like, where's my dad? Right? And even though I'd been allowed to ask questions as a child, knowing that there was someone out there who had made a choice not to be a part of my life was just inherently traumatizing, damaging, sad. I think maybe I now know, having been through the process of being trained in hypnosis and having so many opportunities to dig into my own subconscious, that abandonment contributed so much to fear of stepping into my power and fear of being fully and completely authentic. And I could feel that tension when my husband and I decided that, yeah, we definitely want to try to have kids. And it was around the time that we were essentially like planning our wedding, and I was feeling more and more anxious around this question mark of, why didn't this person want to be in our lives? What was wrong with me that they didn't want to be here? If this could happen to me, like, could this happen to my child? Do I really want to bring a child into the world where this is a possibility, where people don't take responsibility for their actions? If you guys don't know me very well yet, you will probably learn that I can get into existential anxiety pretty quickly. And I have tools and resources to pull myself out of it. So that's why I'm laughing at myself. But that was part of what I really needed to deal with before I believe my body could feel safe conceiving. I was having menstrual cycles. They were not regular. If you recall from last episode where we talk about releasing perfectionism, you'll know that I conceived them around cycle day 40 and had a healthy baby. So I don't want us, thinking that like there was perfection in what my physical body was doing or acting like, but it was enough. Right? I had been properly nourishing myself for years at that point. I was getting good sleep. I had moderate exercise. I had loving people in my life. But there's that one big question mark that I think was really creating so much internal tension for me. And so to explore it and acknowledge it and find peace within it was a really important aspect of me stepping into motherhood and deciding that I wasn't going to carry that anymore. And ultimately deciding that, you know what, someone else's decision and their choice to partake or not partake in raising another human, like it's not mine to carry. I had to decide that I was here for a reason and that I wasn't an accident, that my soul has purpose. Part of this purpose is being here with you today and helping you navigate this very tricky path. And so I hope you know that there might be something that feels tense or incomplete or unclear, and it doesn't mean you have to solve it all today in order to get pregnant or stay pregnant. Even just the acknowledgement that there might be something there is important. And for me, being able to acknowledge that, by God, none of us are accident. Like, each one of us is a walking miracle with a purpose and the ability to love and the ability to have a joyful life no matter what's going on around us. And it may take a lot of internal work and growth. And it's not easy, that's for sure, but it's possible. And that was something I had to find for myself. So, in going there, I'm so curious to hear what you came away from this episode with. Keep an eye out for our upcoming fertility retreat. We're having a 3-day virtual fertility retreat. And day 1 will be focusing more on the physical element, like what's necessary from the physical side to conceive. Day 2 is going to be all about the relationship between the mental, emotional, and spiritual, how that interacts with the physical. And I'll leave day 3 and the rest up for you to explore. So head to the show notes. You can download both the circadian rhythm PDF. You can learn how to use the daily rhythms and your sleep to optimize your hormones, feel more energy, better quality sleep, and be sure to sign up for the virtual retreat. It's been a while since I've done a longer virtual session, so I'm excited to revisit that with you guys. And be sure to leave a review. Let us know what this is bringing up for you. And thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.